New Lipos for 2019 competition racing, and in particular 2S and 1S ones, also standard size and Shorty ones. There are a lot of makes around all around the world, and so I can't look at them all. So I'm going to look at these IP Intellect ones, which are fairly common in many countries, I believe, and also look at some generic ones that you can find on eBay, and a couple of others that are new for 2019. Now, I've tested recently a huge number of 1S batteries, so I've only tested one more of the IP ones, and I'm going to compare it to the results that I had before. As usual, there's a lot of testing I've done on these and measured all the voltages under load. Now, a lot of people are not worried about things like voltage under load, so really these results are for people who do blinky racing, which is no advanced timing on the speed control, so the performance of the battery is paramount to get maximum performance out of a motor in the class you're racing, say 17.5 or 13.5, when the rest of the car is limited by its weight, size, etc. So you want the best voltage, which should give you the best speed. Now, there are a lot of different batteries available, and it's getting more and more confusing. So I'll go over the IP ones, what they're claiming for the new 2019 range. They've put out some blurb. These IP batteries here, they've got this nice green kind of colour sticker on it. Now the previous ones had the blue, so they're still very similar in appearance. You can recognise them now quite easily, because they talk about, well, all these people now claim silicon graphene, so we've been over that before, so ignore that. They talk about them being legal, depends on your country, but anyway, all these hard case batteries should meet the regulations quite easily. They said they've all been updated. Well, every year the manufacturers update their batteries, whether or not much changes inside, it doesn't seem to. The LIHV, or high voltage, when that was introduced a few years ago, was a kind of a step forward, and the reliability of the batteries seems to have increased a few years ago, not so common to swell them up under normal use. Intellect IP and also LRP, in my opinion, from testing etc., they're the same battery inside. They might be selected slightly different at the factory for different capacities, but they all seem to be come out the test same when I test them, weights and everything else, and the claims are very similar. There's a massive range now. You can see this big pile here with the LRP ones. There's a big stack of different sizes, from shorties, short, thin, and they talk about, confusingly, about now long run time, high power, low center of gravity. It's all pretty confusing, so I'm going to try and show you the results and make it a bit simpler to understand. Just before I get onto it, I'll just show you a couple of ads that shows that these things are very similar, these batteries. You've got the IP, which is also Intellect. It's a bit confusing that they're called Intellect or IP. There's the IP HV4, their biggest one that they do. And there is the LRP, the 8000, the biggest one they do. And the information from them, the two sheets, are very similar. They talk about the weight, 330 grams, 330 grams, the size is the same. Tailor-made for stock and modified. Well, when we're talking about modified and boosted racing, you're not too worried. As long as it's a good battery, you're not too worried about the absolute voltage. So I'm looking at these results based on the voltage that we can use in blinky racing. Now the weights are going to be all over the place. The bigger they are, the heavier they are. So when you're doing classes like that aren't blinking, you might be more interested in the weight of the battery, and I've got that on the summary chart as well. So those are the two of the big ones. It's the same for the smaller ones. There's the 3.6 from IP and the 3.5 from LRP. The weights are, they say 155 grams. 155 grams. So as far as I'm concerned, they're the same. Battery inside. So I'm not testing the LRP ones. I've tested all the IP ones. What else can I say about these? Well, you've got quite a big range. You've got 8,400, 7,600, 7,000, 6,000. Those are the ones I've chosen. They then got Shorty versions as well, which get obviously much smaller. I'm going to compare them in the test to a couple of generic ones that you can get. Now this is a Vant battery. It's the big one, the 8,000. This is the 8,400, one of the biggest batteries you can get. They're the maximum 25 millimeters that's allowed under the rules. It's about the maximum size you can get. And I'm going to compare these. And why have I chosen to show the Vant? Well, this battery is pretty cheap on eBay, and it comes maybe not under the Vant's own name that you might find. You might find another name such as Ludicrous. Now that's the same battery, just been relabeled and sold under someone else's name, and you'll probably find others it's the same battery. You might recognize them, but they're quite cheap on eBay, so you can save some money if that's what you want to do. This is the big one. They are exactly the same. Now, some batteries have the connectors are 5mm, some are 4mm, some go all the way through and out the other side, which these do. And you can also see on this side they've got the same caution sticker, which gives you some information about charging. Do not exceed 2C, some other information as well. Most batteries give you some information either on the battery about charging or in the box with a leaflet. So, Ludicrous, Vant. I don't need to test them both. I have tested them both, but I don't need to show you all the results. They come out the same. Now that is that size, and a few other batteries have come out this year, have been improved as well, and I just did this Optipower one. It may not be available in your country, but I'm just showing you that the size, this full size heavy battery, the heaviest ones are normally the biggest capacity. This one's a bit unusual. It says it's only 5,800 milliamps, but this is 8,000, so I thought that'd be interesting to test. Another thing you should be careful of when you buy batteries, these have got holes that go all the way through, as has this one. This has got some plugs that they give you that you can plug off one side. The 2mm charge socket is normally only on one side, which is very annoying. But one thing you must notice is the plus and minus. If you have this side up with the 2mm balance socket, the IP's got plus on this side, the Optipower's got plus on this side, the Vant and Ludicrous etc. have got the plus on the other side. So if you use two different makes or borrow a battery off someone, be very careful, because this one has got a nice plus and minus marks. These are not so clear. They're stamped into the plastic case, plus and minus. In poor lighting you can't really see it, so if you buy these you might want to put a big red blob on it. Otherwise you can put it in the other way in your car if your leads don't reach, but be very careful. There's not a standard on which way these connectors go. So those are the batteries I've tested. As I say, there's loads and loads on the market, many, and I can only test a few and give you an example of what you're going to expect to when you buy them for 2019. I've tested loads of batteries in the past, and if you've seen any of my videos, I get these very confusing sheets of all the results of the voltage under load. Why do I do the voltage under high current? Well, it's the only way you're going to tell in your car when it's under load, drawing a lot of current, whether your car's going to perform well. So on the 1S, which this sheet is, it's about 43 amps I discharge at. On the 2S, it's about 35 amps. First of all, I'm going to just go over the 1S ones. I did a huge test on 1S batteries recently, and I've just added one more, one of the IP ones, and I've summarized the chart. Now I will put a little video, a little part of this in this video about testing, just showing you how I did it. I'm not going to go all over that again, but I will. It'll come after this. But I'm going to show you the results that I've got already. Here's a summary of the 1S chart. If you saw my previous 1S video, I had some winners in that chart, so I'm not going to go over all the batteries that I tested. Aromax, LRP, Centro, Phantom, all recent batteries, and I've rated them now by weight. The heaviest at the top to the lightest at the bottom. Now 1S don't vary very much. The sizes also I've got here, they don't vary. The size of the batteries seem to be the same. The results are very similar. The capacitors are very similar. They all tend to be about 8,000 for the biggest. The C ratings, they're all over the place. I recommend you don't take much notice of C ratings. Manufacturers claim all sorts of things. It's not really a way of buying a battery. If you're buying a well-known good quality battery, it'll have a high C rating. It won't give you an indication if it's going to be better or worse, because these are 120C, 100C, and so I've just, this chart will show you can ignore that. Capacity makes a big difference. If it's a low capacity, obviously if you're running the car in a long race, the battery will go flat earlier, and the voltage will drop towards the end of its discharge and you'll go slower. Anyway, you know all that sort of stuff. Anyway, just quickly, this chart, the Aromax and the Phantom 7.8 won. How did they win? They won on voltage, holding the voltage up to 4,000 milliamps, which is quite a reasonable duration when you're in a race towards the end, drawn 4,000 milliamps. There's not much in it, but these two, Phantoms just started out a little bit better, and the Aromax ended just a little bit better. So I gave them first place, but there's so much little in it. Notice these have 5mm connectors now. A lot of 1S batteries were 4mm, and a few have gone to 5. Second place was the LRP and the Centro. Hardly anything in it, but just a tiny bit. This one, the LRP, still has a 4mm connector. And the capacitors, they all got over 8,000. So not much in it, but they stood out as being better than any of the other batteries I tested. Especially some of the older ones. These are all pretty recent, new on the market. But I'm showing you this because I've tested the new IP battery, which is called the High Voltage 4 HV4 for 2019. One of those green ones. And the results. Well, all the IP batteries now are called LiH3, which means you can charge them to a higher voltage, and I'll show you that in a second. But I test them first at the same terminal voltage as the normal 1S, which is on your charger, it'd be set to 4.2. If you charge to LiHV, it'd be set to 4.35. which makes quite a difference. Anyway, I just want to show you quickly what happened with the IP HV4. It's called and unfortunately I couldn't get the i8200 because they brought two out. One's supposed to be high power, one's supposed to be high duration. On their spec they list them both at the same weight, 150 grams. I measured the weights and this is 151.2. Same thickness as the others, there's nothing in it, they're all the same size. It's supposed to be a 6600, rated 120C. I charged it at the normal voltage and I got quite a long run time. It's supposed to be 6.6, I got 7.626. The voltage didn't quite match up to these winners, slightly out. If you were allowed to charge the high voltage setting, makes a huge difference. Voltage is far beats these, and the capacity goes up to a massive 8421, which beats these as well. So if you were allowed to do LIHV charging on these, it would beat everything. But you're not allowed to, and it just doesn't quite meet them under normal charging. I would have liked to charge the check the 8.2 because this obviously is not a 6.6. It must be the same battery. It's a bit strange. Also strange, say for IP they're still using 4mm connectors. They do have the terminals round the other way. You will have to watch that compared to these, which is odd considering that all the other IP batteries are all 5mm connectors. If I manage to get one of these 8.2s, I'll come back to this. Anyway, that's the 1S. This IP battery is slightly disappointing. For normal competition racing where you can't use the higher voltage, you'll be better off on one of these 4 of the previous winners from my big test. Testing the Lipos, I have to do it in a quick succession, no waiting around. Here's one just going to cycle up and charge, ready to test, the 1S. Here's one on test, I'm just finishing now. I've done all the voltage readings at various milliamp readings. It's a 6.6, so when this drops to 3.0 volts I can get a milliamp reading. Here's the heavy load, see it's drawing 40 amps still. This just powers the display. That is quite accurate, that I double checked that with a voltmeter, so, and that's, I use the same setup to test everything, so nothing varies. So we're just waiting until that fully discharged and I can get a capacity reading and then compare it to other ones. Now this is a high voltage LIHV. I'm doing a normal voltage charge at the moment test on these. Then I'll repeat it with the high voltage test just to show you the difference that charging to a higher voltage gives you more capacity, and higher voltages obviously. So it's a 6.6 and it's at 6,000 already, and the voltage is still holding up well, which is particularly good. I record the size, the weights, and then I've got all the results for others here, and then I'll do a comparison chart. So it's just coming to an end, and then this is for 1S. For 2S I use a different load, that one down there, and we just repeat the whole thing, just but with 2S settings. It's still discharging. On the 1S I do a balance. I've got a balance connection to make sure it's charged fully. So it's just coming to the end. It's already got past 6,600, so yeah, that's pretty impressive. With the LIHV batteries, normally the capacity would be about 10% lower when charged to the normal standard charge. for LiPo, so the fact that this is already exceeded 6,000 and they've come up to 7,000, it's not even flat yet. It looks like they've underrated this battery. It's just about to flatten now. As soon as it gets to 3.0, I'll take it off. I pull out the connector down here. Disconnected. 7,626. Pretty impressive. Well exceeded the 6.6 that they said. And when I repeat this test, charging it to the LIHV, the higher voltage, it will have an even higher capacity. The test on the IP6600 LIHV, when charged to the high voltage, 4.35 volts maximum per cell, and I've done rerun the test, and you can see that it's now done 8,421 milliamp. When charged to the lower voltage, it only goes 7,626 milliamps, and the voltage throughout is obviously higher. I've got 4.32, and it holds the voltage higher all the way through, and higher capacity for a 6.6. Now this is part of their range. They've got high capacity, high power. This is supposed to be the high power one, and they do an 8,200, which is a high capacity one. I haven't been able to get that. Well, it's a shame really, because I could have compared. They list the same weight, 150 grams, on their website. I measured this one on 51.2, so whether or not they would give identical results, unfortunately I don't have one to test. But it's just having a quick look at the results here. One of the best batches I tested was, say, the Aromax 8000. It's not a high voltage one, so if you look at the results along here, it gave 8,276, which is close to this one on high voltage, and the voltage at 4,000 milliamps, 3.72, and this was 3.73, so and standard voltage 368. So it looks like the Aromax charged normally, it started at 4.19, actually performs almost as good as the high voltage cell. So the cost is higher for the Aromax, £65 as opposed to only 40 in this country. But if you want a good battery and you're not allowed to charge to the high voltage setting, these new batteries like Aromax, I believe Centro, and a couple of others I tested, are charged to normal voltage, seem to virtually perform as well as a high voltage battery, which is very interesting. Don't know how they managed to do that. I've done a quick test on a couple of Shorty batteries. There's so many different sizes around, loads and loads and loads. I did test one of the IP ones. This is a 3600 HV3, the blue one. I tested the 4200, the green one, but I don't actually have it here at the moment. And also this Vant one, which is only rated at 5,000 milliamps, but is physically much larger. It's a full depth one, whereas this one is only thin. Footprint is very similar. 3006.5. On the chart, I just show you the three that I tested. The weight, that Ludicrous Vant, Ludicrous one, is a massive 221.6 grams. These two are very similar, 156, 155. Thickness, 25 mil on that one. These are 18.4, quite thin. 150C rating on the Vant Ludicrous. So as I said, you can take these ratings with a pinch of salt, these C ratings. Anyway, the test. Discharged them. I've only taken the reading up to 3,000 milliamps on these. That 5,000 milliamp one came out at 5,232. The IP3600 only made 3422 unless you charge it to the higher voltage, which it's designed for, and then it made 38. The IP4200 HV4 had a little more duration, 3040, and the voltage was better just by a little bit, but that normally happens with the capacity. One thing you should notice about these batteries I didn't point out was that the price. Shorty batteries tend to be around £40 in this country. £40, the IP40 was £43, not much in it. The Ludicrous 5 had much better voltage though. If you're after speed and not too worried about the weight, that would go noticeably quicker when charged at a normal voltage. If you could charge higher, then this one would be quicker. Onto the 2S test. I've done a lot of testing on 2S batteries, but we're interested in these IP ones mainly, how good they are. So I prepared a chart. Again, I've tried to condense down all the relevant information. I've put the batteries in order of weight. The heaviest one at the top to the lightest at the bottom. And the heaviest one's the IP 8400 HV4, that's that big one there. It came out at 334.6 grams. The next weight was the Vant Ludicrous 8000, 326.5 grams. Then there's a drop to around the 300 mark, and it keeps going down. Then there's another drop at the bottom here, you see, to about 270 odd grams. Why is this important? Well, you may be more interested, if you're not doing blinky racing, in the weight of the battery to balance your car out, and you're not too worried about the actual load voltage, because if you're doing boosted or mod, the weight might be more significant to you. So I've listed them in order. But there are a couple of other things to notice on this chart though. The heavier the battery, generally the better it performs. I have given them a rating from first to last, and you might be able to see that looking at it already, that the heavy ones, these two at the top, came first based on voltage maintained under load. I've got three readings here: start of the race, middle and end, say 4000, and the actual capacity that it reached. The IP again is a high voltage one. I've marked these in red. The IP ones were the only high voltage ones that I've tested that are recently out, and I've tested them at the standard voltage and the high voltage. Standard voltage, I can compare them all, and they still came out the best at 4000 milliamps. These two, the Vant in fact, beat the IP, holding up the higher voltage than the next ones down. 7.51, 749, 7.45 was second place, which was also an IP 7600, and it goes down. Normally the lighter ones, the voltage is lower, they can't maintain the voltage. I've ignored all the things about IP saying long duration or high power or whatever. It all boils down basically to the weight. The heavier the battery, the more powerful it is, the more likely it's going to hold the voltage up. The only one that that bucked the trend a bit was this Optipower, which was an 8500. I only got about 7,500 out of it. So I also did a test where I discharged it and heated and charged it straight up, so that it was quite hot when I was testing it. As you can see, a lot of people do this in racing anyway. It does increase the voltage significantly when you do that, which means you will go faster and a tiny bit increase in capacity, but I couldn't get 8,500 out of it. It did weigh 308 grams. So IP, the 8.4 came first, the IP76 here came second, not far behind on the voltage at 4,000 milliamps at all. Again, if you charge it to a higher voltage, you get a much increased voltage and runtime. The third of the IPs was actually the 6,000, which outperformed the 7,000. Well, that's what I would expect, because it does weigh more, a little bit more, and it seems to be the heavier the battery, the better it's going to perform. It made over 6,000 at its rating. These ratings, by the way, for the high voltage cells are for high voltage capacity. So when you charge the lower voltage, you will get slightly less capacity, maybe as low as 10% less. That one outperformed the 7,000 by a little bit. It did have more runtime, the 7,000, than the 6, but at 4,000 milliamps, the 6,000 outperformed it. If you want to run the car until it's dead flat, the 7,000 has more capacity. The big ones, of course, are always the fattest, 25 mil basically. Then they drop to 23 mil, and the lighter ones 22 mil. So it just follows a pattern. Weight is big. As the weight comes down, they thin out. The voltage drops as well. It's a pretty straightforward thing. You want the best battery, you'll be more likely to get it by looking at the weight than trying to look at the C rating or even the capacity, though the highest capacity would normally be much better. You see 8.4, 7.6, 6.3, 6.2, 6. This Optipower was interesting. The Optipower 8.5 only made about 7,500. The Optipower 5.8 made 6,500, and it maintained a better voltage than the 8.5. Up to 4,000 milliamps, it outperformed the bigger one, and it weighed a little bit less, not 10 grams. There's one more thing you might want to consider is the price. The battery's prices vary an awful lot. Consider that the IP Intellect ones tend to be fairly cheap. Not as cheap as the Ludicrous Vant ones you can find on eBay and other places, and they're quite a lot cheaper sometimes. Some batteries, well, that have names like Orca, £90 for a 6.3 compared to, or £70 for the IP. It's notably more expensive. The IPs tend to be cheaper, 78, 74. Optipower was a good battery, and I put that in there as well. It gave a good result, but it's fading a bit against some of these others. I only gave it 7th place. And finally, the connectors. All the IP ones have 5mm plus and minuses the opposite way to most of these others, which still have, a lot of these still have 4mm. Aromax was a good battery, but in its time, but again it's fallen behind slightly. Anything else from this chart? I think I've explained virtually everything. Generally ignore the C ratings. 120, 150, 130. Capacity bigger ones are normally the heavier ones. In conclusion, the new IP batteries, they're very good. You'll choose one based on the weight, or if you're not too worried about the weight, get the biggest capacity one. It's almost certainly going to provide more power, more voltage than the smaller ones. The thinner ones are called LCG, low center of gravity. Obviously they weigh less, they're thinner, they're lower in the car. That may make a difference if you're set up with a lot of grip. Vant ones, Ludicrous, fairly cheap. Some of these other ones, like this Orca, very nice labelling and everything on it, a lot of information, but very expensive compared to some others. Optipower confusing a bit that their i8 has outperforms the very big one to a certain point. And the 1S ones, again, they very, very similar, but the latest ones are just taking the edge.